Africa makes up about 14% of the world population. 60% of Africans are below the age of 24. So we've got a massive youth bulge. We are also the poorest continent in the world, so about 80% of Africans live on less than $4 a day. So there's this real need to want to connect, but it's got to be uber affordable, seriously data light in everything that's done. It's also got one of the highest prepaid numbers, so about 96% of all subscriptions or connections in Africa are prepaid. So if you can compare that to Latin America, which is at about 82%, and Europe at about 52%, so really high prepaid rate. 65% mobile penetration, so that's percentage of connections currently, or mobile subscriptions in Africa. The 6 biggest markets, they start off with Nigeria, biggest, Egypt second biggest, South Africa comes in at the 3rd biggest, Algeria and Morocco, and then Kenya is 6th. A lot of the stats that you'll see are from what they call the A25, which is the top 25 most connected countries in Africa. So of the 54, I think, countries in Africa, 25 of those account for something like over 91% of all the connections. So a lot of the research is focused on those 25 countries. Interesting to see that, I mean, we know that in a few of the countries, there's over 100% mobile penetration, South Africa being one of them. So what they say with a lot of the mobile penetration that you come across in Africa is that it's probably, when the numbers are high, inflated by about 20 to about 25%. So in particular, countries like Libya, South Africa, Egypt, those countries that are over 100%, there is that inflated number. There's also quite a discrepancy between countries with a huge mobile penetration, and then and that's Libya. I think that's got the highest penetration in Africa at about 170%, and then you've got Ethiopia, which is sitting at 10%. So there's massive scope for growth in terms of looking at the outlying countries that are not as connected as they could be in Africa, and getting them kind of connected. So all of this makes Africa the 2nd largest mobile market in the world. That's after Asia Pacific. And it also means that it's the fastest growing country in the world in terms of connections. So in 2008, there was something like 246 million mobile subscriptions in Africa. By the end of this year, we're looking at about 735 million mobile subscriptions. So that's of 1 billion people. The growth, they reckon, has been a compound growth of about between 20 and 30% over the last 10 or 12 years. This is kind of what the graph looks like. I find it quite remarkable. So in 2010, the continent passed that 50% penetration rate, and between 2010 and 2011, the numbers increased from about 50 to, by the end of 2011, approaching 65. So that's around the 15% mark in the space of a year. And what I find really interesting is that if you start looking at the effect of mobile penetration on GDP, there's quite a close link. So they reckon that for every 10% increase in mobile penetration, there is a 0.8% increase in GDP locally. So if you look at just that space between 2010 and the end of 2011, you're looking at an increase in the GDP of Africa of about 1.2%. And I think this graph really indicates nicely where we are from a global point of view, that where the growth in mobile is coming from has shifted from the developed markets and the emerged markets in 2000 to now almost 80% of that growth coming from emerging markets. So a lot of the first world countries have got, they've kind of reached saturation. But the whole sort of lens and the focus is now on these emerging markets and the potential and the growth that comes with the increase in mobile. About 90% of all phones now are in Africa are mobile phones. This one is absolutely amazing to me. They reckon that by the year 2015, there'll be more people in sub-Saharan Africa with capabilities to be connected on mobile than they will have with connection to electricity. I mean, that's the amazing thing about our continent is that with that kind of, in the absence of luxury, creativity is born, and it's just so true. It's also leapfrogged PC, and a lot of internet is now being consumed via mobile, and that's only going to increase. So more than 50% of African mobile internet users don't use the internet on a PC at all. Obviously, this is attributed to the growth in our capability and our spectrum with all the undersea cables. So between 2008, where the download speed was 80 gigabytes per second, that has increased 300-fold to today. And it's still on the up and up. So almost 40% of Africans in the top 25 mobile markets in Africa have no access to mobile services. And I find this quite interesting. I think as there's a shift from voice to data, so value-added services are going to be increasing, and increasing at a rate of not. This, for me, was probably the biggest wake-up call. At the moment, there's only a 3% smartphone penetration in Africa, which is, another area for growth, but it's really tiny. So this is where that comment of, there's this window period that we've got to play with, where it comes from. Because yes, you need to be innovating and sort of keeping up with the times, but it means that there's nobody else in the market right now that can engage with people in this moment on their feature phones in the middle of nowhere. They reckon that by 2015 that would have grown to about 15%, so you can see that there's going to be real momentum there. In South Africa at the moment we're on about 15%, and it's going to get up to around 25-30% by 2015. So yes, it is growing, and it's growing quickly, but it's going to be really interesting to see how those really low-cost, probably Android to be honest, phones that are flooding into the market are going to change the shape of the way the market grows and evolves. When you dig down into what handsets people are using at the moment, Nokia still has a pretty good stronghold, about 50% of the market with Nokia. Samsung's sitting on about 25% or so, and BlackBerry doing pretty well. So it's probably closer to about 9 or 10%, the sense that we've got. Those are some of the more official numbers, and those are the guys that are really sort of, they've got the stronghold of the market. That's amazing, but how, where's the iPhone? And iPhone is so small that it literally doesn't feature. So, and even when you ask people what they'd like their next phone to be, which is this next graph, Nokia actually maintains its position. Samsung has a big knock, and BlackBerry really jumps up. There's a slight increase in iPhone, but it's just sort of off the charts from an aspirational point of view. BlackBerry is still attainable. So it's quite interesting because it's not really reflecting what's happening on a global level. Samsung's doing incredibly well, and BlackBerry, might not have quite as much momentum at the moment. And the local market is saying something different. BlackBerry is still aspirational to me. It's still something that I want, that all my friends have got. Those are the kind of the bigger picture numbers. If you start looking at some of the trends that are kind of coming out, you would have obviously picked up voice to data. Voice is really kind of handing over that baton. It's not going to totally eliminate, data is not going to totally eliminate voice, but it's definitely moving in that direction. Another one is value-added services. When you start sort of playing around in the space, you start realizing the amount of incredible stuff that's going on in this sort of, put an M in front of anything and you've got, M health or M agri or whatever it may be. And there's incredible services that are being delivered via low-end mobile phones that help people that don't have the level of access to information that we have engage on topics that are really important to them. So using agriculture as an example, guys that are subsistence farmers, and they can engage with knowledge banks around, fertilizing, the price of crops, where they should be selling them, how much they should be selling them for, season tips and hints, all those kinds of things. So value-added services, there's a lot of room for growth, are definitely going to be increasing at a rate of knots. I think we're all quite familiar with this. Everyone's waiting to see where it's going. It's anything to do with mobile money. So wallets, M-payments, banking for the unbanked, that kind of thing. And I read recently that Africa, in particular Kenya, are really leading the world in terms of mobile payments and wallets and those kinds of things, cashless payments. A couple of years ago, they launched M-Pesa, which is a money transfer and sort of banking for the unbanked system. And within the first 30 months, they had 8.5 million people registered and using and engaging with the service. And they had about 18,000 M-Pesa agents around the country that you could go to and engage with and transact with. So if you're looking at the challenges that face Africa, it's long distances, it's time, it's money that people don't have to travel into places and connect with banks that they probably don't really trust because it's quite foreign. This whole concept of having M-Pesa agents in your local area that you can engage with, and it's a very credible way and safe way of transacting. And I really think that's the way it's going.
Something like that, right?